What's going on, guys? Nick Moore from the PHP Pros. Welcome to episode 5, installment 5. Today we will be wrapping up variables. We'll be going over numbers and constants. These are two topics in the W3 Schools tutorial that I have not yet touched on. I went over, if you guys remember, 2 episodes back, I believe, I went over integers and floats. But now we'll be going a little bit more in depth on them. And finding out different ways that we can use them and so on. So let's jump right in. So the first thing that you're going to do today is learn how to get the type. If you guys don't remember type, either look at the W3 Schools info on it or watch my tutorial on it. But types, if you remember, the 3 kinds that we went over were string, integer, and float. And there's a 4th one called bool Boolean that we touched on quickly, but we didn't really go over. Today we'll be going over the 2nd and 3rd ones, the integers and the floats. Now with type and typing in consideration, there's something I wanted to show you guys, okay? And that is called VarDump. Essentially what that does is it tells us the type of the variable that we're currently using. So for example, let's make 3 different variables here. Let's make the first one called A. And we could say A equals letter. Okay, and then we'll make B. We'll make B an integer, 12. And we'll make C a float, or a decimal in layman's terms, 9.97. Okay, so now what I can do is I can say echo var dump A. Okay, so now if we come over here, string, and it'll even tell you the length of it. Okay, so now let's var dump B, int. Okay, and now let's var dump lastly C. Okay, so this, you can use this on anything. You can say we'll make a 4th one called bool, just so you guys can touch base with it right now. Like I said, we won't go over it until I think 1 or 2 more videos. And if we do this and change this to D, it's going to say bool, which is short for Boolean. Okay, so that's the first thing I wanted to show you guys today was VarDump, so that if you're ever confused on the main 4 that we're going to go over, just VarDump it, and it'll tell you exactly what's going on. So to another extent, I want to go over a couple more functions. In the last chapter we did a lot on string functions. Today we're going to be doing just some very simple lightweight functions called isInt, isFloat, and isNumeric. Okay, so these are going to return a bool to us. So this is a true-false kind of deal. So you either are an integer or you're not. Same goes with float and numeric. So the first thing we can do is say is int $A, and as you guys know, this should say false. Okay, oh, I'm sorry, that's what happens when you have an error in PHP. Okay, is int, and nothing printed out because null, aka it's false. Or what we can do to actually see the words on the screen is just var dump this. So if we say var dump, so now we're actually var dumping the result of the isInt. So now it'll say bool false. There you go. So now we can also do the same with B. Var dump isInt B. True, it is an integer. And now we can do C. False. Okay. The reason that is like that is this is the only integer. Remember that it cannot have any decimal points. It can only be an integer, negative or positive. So now we have another function which is isFloat. It's going to be identical to isInt, but you guessed it, it only checks for floats. Okay, so this will be true because we have a float. A is a string, it'll be false. B is an integer, it'll be false. And lastly, D is a Boolean, it'll be false. Okay, so with that said, super easy. 2 functions, they return yes or no, true and false in computer world. Okay, Now, isNumeric is a little bit different. Essentially, it tells us if we can make a number out of a string or any other weird variable, okay? Or a combination of variables even. So it can be a float, can be an integer. As long as it's numeric, it'll be true, okay? So let's try this now. Let's say, ready, is numeric, and we're gonna leave VarDump on there because like I said, it is a function that returns true or false. So if I didn't put VarDump on there, we would just have an empty screen. So is numeric, and let's say A, okay? False, all right? Now here's a twist. If I change this A, it can still be a string, but what if I do this? I say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay? Is numeric, yes, okay? So essentially this can be a number. If you ever put a character or a space or anything like that in there, it'll be false, okay? So if the number inside of a string, well, I guess you could say, I shouldn't say number. If the characters inside of a string are an integer or a float, it is okay. So that means numeric is true. So even with the float, ready, it'll be true, okay? So with that being said, and then D obviously is not going to be because that's just a Boolean, okay? So the last thing I want to go over in terms of numbers and numerics is casting. So essentially, we can play around with strings, integers, floats. I believe you can do it with bools too. Is you can cast them as an integer. So essentially, a numeric value, even if it's in a string or it's in a decimal or an integer, I can change it around and make it one of the two options, integer or float. So I can essentially force it, say, you know, hey, string 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you are now a float. All right, and then if we VarDump it, the type of it will be float now. So let's go ahead and look at this. I'm going to take the isNumeric off because right now our objective is to see the data type. So normally if we didn't have this casting here, this would be a string, okay? But now if we run it, it is an integer, okay? And now I can do the same thing with float. All right, and then it's a float, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can take a decimal or a float, 123.3, and cast it to an integer, okay? And then what it's going to do is truncate the decimal point, okay? And now vice versa, you can take an integer and cast it to a float. It won't have, you know, it won't have your 0.00 because it just wouldn't show them. But, you know, if you took 123 divided by 10 or something, right? It's going to be a float anyway, but you're just kind of forcing the data type upon it. Now, this is something I'm actually curious about. I don't know the answer to this, so let's try casting a Boolean, true. So like I told you guys before, true can mean 1. It can mean true or 1. False can be 0. It can be false and it can be null. So I'm actually curious about that. Okay, so yeah, so what it does is it takes a Boolean and it turns it into the respective casted type. So like I said, true is equivalent to 1 and false is equivalent to 0. So this should give us an integer of value 0. Okay, so I learned something new today too. Cool. All right, so that just about does it for numbers, and then we'll touch on constants real quick. Okay, so the last thing that I want to go over with you guys is constants. This will be really quick. It's very, very simple. So all we say is define, parentheses, and then we're going to put a name in here. We can call it my cool var, okay? And then you can give it any value you want it to. You can give it a string. So you can say nix var, okay? You can make another one called my cooler var, and we can make it a 2, okay? Now the point of constants versus variables is that constants do not change. They are meant to stay the same, okay? And we call them differently. If you guys remember, which I hope you do, when you call variables in PHP, you use this signifier dollar sign. Okay. But with constants, we do not. So all we would have to say here is my cool var, and then we can echo it out. Okay, so making it a constant means we don't want to change it, and we don't have to call it with a dollar sign. Now if we echo this out, it's going to say Nick's var. Sweet. Same with this one, my cooler var. It's going to print out a 2. Okay. And the very last thing that I want to touch on is going back to scope. Remember, we talked about it a couple days ago. Scope is the delimiter or the jurisdiction that we are able to use variables in. And what I wanted to let you know was defined variables, unlike our regular variables, are 100% global by default. They're automatically going to be global, so you do not have to put in the keyword global to call them. So I'll show you an example right here. We'll bring back the function say hi. This will be my go-to function. And here we go, and it'll say hey. All right, so with that being said, I'll see you guys on episode 6. Happy Friday. Spend time with your loved ones. Stay safe. Hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like and turn on the bell so that next time I upload a video, you guys will be notified.